Okay, so you want to own a McDonald's. Here's the fact that changes everything. A McDonald's franchise does not make its real money on hamburgers. It makes its real money on rent. The corporation buys the land. The corporation builds the walls. Then it leases the whole thing back to the person standing at the register. In 2020 alone, McDonald's Corporation collected close to $3.78 billion in rental income from its own franchisees. That was 27% of the company's total global revenue, and it came in whether the fries were hot or the drive-through line was empty. Read that again. More than a quarter of everything McDonald's earns comes from being a landlord, not a chef. Here's how it actually works. You, the franchisee, sign a 20-year agreement. You pay an initial fee of $45,000 just for the right to use the name. Then you spend $1.3 million to $2.7 million building or buying the restaurant itself. But in most cases, you don't own the ground underneath it. McDonald's does. So once the doors open, you write 3 checks every single month, no matter what. Rent to McDonald's real estate arm, a royalty of 4% of your gross sales, and a marketing contribution of another 4% of gross sales. That's before payroll, before beef, before a single napkin. This is not hype. This is math. On a location doing $3 million a year, that's roughly $240,000 leaving your account before you've covered a single labor shift. And here's the asymmetry nobody puts on the recruiting brochure. Your rent is usually a percentage of your sales, with a fixed minimum floor. So if sales go up, McDonald's collects more. If sales go down, you still owe the floor. The operator carries the debt, carries the inventory risk, carries the local labor market. The landlord carries almost nothing. Harry Sonneborn, the finance executive who built this structure in the 1950s, said it plainly at the time. McDonald's was not really in the hamburger business. It was in the real estate business, and the burgers were just the mechanism that got tenants in the door to pay rent. Here's where it gets interesting. This structure didn't happen by accident. In 1956, McDonald's created a separate real estate subsidiary, the Franchise Realty Corporation, with one job: acquire the land, put up the building, then lease the finished package to the operator, sometimes marked up as much as 40% over the corporation's own carrying cost. That markup is quiet. It doesn't show up on a menu board. It shows up once a month on a rent statement as a fixed obligation that exists whether the parking lot is full or empty. And the model doesn't look identical everywhere, which is worth pausing on. A traditional freestanding restaurant carries the full weight of this structure. Land, building, 20-year term, the whole capital stack. A satellite location, the kind you find inside an airport terminal or a hospital cafeteria, carries a much smaller entry fee, sometimes as low as $500, because McDonald's isn't the landlord there, a third party is, and the corporation is just renting its brand into someone else's real estate. Small-town formats sit in between, with a reduced franchise fee near $22,500. But notice what stays constant across every single format: the royalty percentage and the marketing percentage. Whether you're the landlord's primary tenant or a subtenant in someone else's building, McDonald's still takes its cut of your top line. The real estate arrangement changes. The toll booth never does. Here's the trap nobody talks about, and here's a name to prove it. Brown Customer Delight Group, known in bankruptcy filings as BCDG, was a 6-unit Iowa franchisee that had once run 10 McDonald's locations around Des Moines. In 2016, it filed for bankruptcy. Do the math with me. BCDG paid $2 million to acquire one additional location, underwritten on a projection of $2.7 million in annual revenue. The store fell $1 million short of that number in its first real year. Meanwhile, its 2 existing restaurants nearby saw their own sales decline because the new location cannibalized their customer base. That's not a rival chain stealing traffic. According to the company's own court filings, some of that lost traffic came from McDonald's building new company-approved restaurants close to BCDG's existing stores. By the time the numbers were tallied, BCDG's sales had fallen $4.5 million in a single year, producing a loss of just under $900,000. The balance sheet showed $6.7 million in assets against $15.6 million in liabilities. Its largest creditor, a bank, was still owed $6.1 million. That same year, McDonald's corporate rolled out an all-day breakfast initiative and required franchisees to fund the equipment retrofit to support it. BCDG had to borrow to cover the shortfall. In August, McDonald's moved to terminate the franchise agreement. The bankruptcy filing followed within weeks. BCDG did not survive as an independent operator. Its remaining restaurants were absorbed back into the system. The brand lived on. The tenant did not. The entry ticket itself proves the thesis. McDonald's requires a minimum of $750,000 in liquid, unborrowed personal funds just to apply before you've spent $1 on the building. That's a screening requirement, not a suggestion. On top of it, applicants typically need another $100,000 per restaurant in working capital, sitting untouched, just to be considered financially stable enough to operate. The full build-out, land improvements, equipment, signage, and opening inventory then runs $1.3 million to $2.7 million, depending on the market and the format. Let that sit for a second. The $45,000 franchise fee, the number most people fixate on, is only about 2 to 4% of what actually goes out the door. The other 96 to 98% is construction, kitchen equipment, HVAC, signage, and site work on a property you frequently don't own. None of that capital buys you the underlying land. In most traditional locations, you are leasing dirt that McDonald's already owns or controls, and you are paying, out of your own borrowed money, to improve it. Every dollar of that capital sits on your balance sheet as debt, while the land appreciates on McDonald's balance sheet as an asset. This is the invisible plumbing of the deal. You finance the improvements, the corporation captures the appreciation, and when your 20-year term ends, the building and everything bolted to the floor typically reverts to the landlord, not to you. Here's the trap nobody talks about, part 2. Even a healthy store bleeds cash on a schedule you don't control. The 4% royalty and the marketing fee, at least another 4%, are calculated on gross sales, not on profit. If your food and labor costs spike, McDonald's still collects the same 8% or more off the top. Read that again. 8 cents of every single dollar that crosses the counter leaves the building before you've paid a cook, a manager, or a light bill. Then there's periodic reimaging. Every several years, the corporation can require a remodel that costs $500,000 to $1 million, financed entirely by the operator, timed entirely by corporate. It's not optional, and it's not negotiable if you want to keep the license. McDonald's also just raised its royalty rate on new and relocated restaurants from 4% to 5%. The first increase in nearly 3 decades, according to reporting cited by CNBC. That single percentage point on a $4 million location is another $40,000 a year, permanently, on top of everything already owed. And here's the catch that closes the loop. Labor costs and food costs are the 2 largest line items an operator controls day to day, and they're also the 2 most volatile. Beef prices swing with commodity cycles. Minimum wage moves with local legislation. Neither of those cost lines is capped, negotiated, or shared with the franchisor, but rent, royalty, and marketing fees don't flex downward when your costs flex upward. Every one of these levers points the same direction. The corporation gets paid first, gets paid on top-line revenue, and gets paid on a schedule that has nothing to do with whether you personally took home a paycheck this month. There's one factor you never get to vote on: where McDonald's decides to build next. Call it the trap door under the floor. The corporation approves new locations inside your own trade area, sometimes just a few miles from a restaurant you already operate. When that happens, you are, in effect, competing against your own landlord's next tenant for the same customers under the same roof brand. BCDG lived this exact scenario. You can run flawless operations, hit every quality score, and still watch your own franchisor route your customers somewhere else. Here's what the 2 outcomes actually look like. In numbers, not vibes. In an optimistic year, a single traditional restaurant does close to the domestic average of $4 million in gross sales. The actual 2024 system-wide figure McDonald's reported for restaurants open at least a year. After food and paper costs near 30%, labor near 30%, and 8% in combined royalty and marketing fees. Before you've even touched rent, an efficient operator can clear roughly $300,000 to $400,000 in restaurant-level profit. Franchise industry reporting puts average owner take-home closer to $150,000 a year once debt service and rent are fully accounted for. Payback on the initial investment, in that scenario, can land somewhere around 5 to 7 years. That's the version McDonald's puts in the recruiting deck, and for the roughly 79% of locations doing over $3 million a year, it's a real outcome, not a fantasy. In a realistic bad year, The kind BCDG lived through, sales run closer to $2.8 million, undercut by new competing locations built by the franchisor itself, or by a soft local economy. Food and labor costs don't fall proportionally, because minimum wage and beef prices don't care about your traffic count. Fixed rent, royalty, marketing fees, and debt service stay exactly where they were, dollar for dollar. That's the year the operator posts a loss approaching $900,000, the same order of magnitude BCDG actually reported the year before it filed, on a balance sheet that had already tipped to $6.7 million in assets against $15.6 million in liabilities. Same brand, same menu, same royalty rate as the optimistic case. Opposite outcome, decided almost entirely by real estate placement and debt load, not by how well anyone flipped the burgers. So picture that franchisee again, standing behind the counter at 6 a.m., signing for the beef delivery, covering a shift because someone called in sick. The burger is not the business. The rent is the business.